They threw coins at her feet. Right there on the sidewalk, in the pouring rain, 6 months pregnant, with exactly $1,247 to her name. Her mother-in-law laughed and said it was bus fare. Her husband drove away with his mistress without looking back. She stood there, soaking wet, humiliated, with nowhere to go and no one to call. That was the moment Emma Hartwell hit rock bottom. But here is what they did not know. They did not know about the black Rolls-Royce turning the corner. They did not know about the billionaire inside who had been watching her for 20 years. And they certainly did not know that the company they had just used to destroy her was built on her father's stolen work. What happens next is one of the most satisfying revenge stories you will ever hear. A pregnant woman with nothing against a billion-dollar empire with everything to lose. She never raised her voice. She never begged. She never cried. She just smiled and walked away. Minutes later, she rode away in a billionaire's limo. And that is when the real war began. Stay with me until the end, because the way she takes them down will give you chills. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Sterling and Associates law firm was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from an overzealous air conditioning system, but the kind that seeps into your bones and settles there like a warning. It was a room designed to intimidate, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline and its gleaming mahogany table that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Emma Hartwell sat alone on one side of that table, her hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant, exhausted, wearing a maternity dress from Target that had seen better days, the fabric stretched thin at the seams. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent wondering how her life had unraveled so completely. She had been a corporate lawyer once, a good one, man, top of her class at Northwestern. The kind of woman who commanded respect in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. But that woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. 3 years of marriage to Marcus Vance had stripped away everything she thought she knew about herself, leaving behind this hollow version who flinched at raised voices and apologized for existing. The door swung open. Marcus entered first, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him something. At 38, he was handsome in that polished, magazine cover way that had first attracted Emma. Dark hair perfectly styled, jawline sharp enough to cut glass. A Rolex Submariner glinting on his wrist, a recent purchase to celebrate some business milestone she had not been invited to witness. Behind him came Arthur Higgins, his lawyer. 55 years old with the cold eyes of a reptile and a reputation for destroying lives at $600 an hour. He carried a leather briefcase that probably contained the final pieces of Emma's dismantled existence, but it was the third person who made Emma's blood run cold. Victoria Vance swept into the room like she owned it, which, knowing the Vance family's connections, she probably did. At 64, Marcus's mother was the picture of old money elegance, a Hermes scarf draped artfully around her neck, perfectly coiffed silver hair, eyes that had never looked at Emma with anything but thinly veiled contempt. Emma had not expected her mother-in-law to attend. Marcus did not greet his wife, did not look at the belly that carried his child. He simply checked his Rolex and sighed. "Let's make this fast," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I have dinner plans." Victoria sat beside her son, adjusting her scarf with manicured fingers. "I insisted on attending. Someone needs to ensure this is handled cleanly." Arthur Higgins opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of papers. He slid them across the table with the tip of his pen, as if touching them directly might contaminate him. "The terms are straightforward," he began, his voice carrying the oily smoothness of a man who had delivered bad news 1,000 times before. "Mrs. Vance receives the 2014 Honda Civic, the contents of her personal savings account, which currently stands at $1,247 in a one-time settlement of $5,000. Emma stared at the numbers. $1,247. That was everything she had managed to save over 3 years, squirreling away small amounts from the household allowance Marcus gave her like she was a child earning a weekly stipend. $5,000. That was the sum total of her worth to the man who had promised to love her until death do them part. She thought about the career she had given up, the clients she had walked away from, The future she had sacrificed because Marcus said he needed a wife who would support him, not compete with him. She thought about the house she had cleaned, the meals she had cooked, the parties she had hosted with a smile plastered on her face while he criticized everything from her dress to her conversation topics in the car ride home. "It's generous, Ellie," Marcus said, using the nickname she had once loved and now despised. "The prenup gives you nothing." "I'm being kind." Emma's voice came out quiet, barely above a whisper. "I gave up my career. I supported you for 3 years. I'm carrying your child." Victoria cut in before Marcus could respond, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Let's discuss that, shall we?" She pulled a folder from her Birkin bag and placed it on the table. "We'll require a paternity test before any further negotiations. Given the timeline, there are questions." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Emma's jaw tightened. She felt the baby kick, as if even her unborn daughter recognized the cruelty in that room. "The contractor who installed your home theater?" Emma said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I spoke to him twice." Victoria's smile was ice. "Twice is enough." Uma looked at Marcus then, really looked at him, searching for some trace of the man she had fallen in love with. The man who had brought her flowers on their third date and told her she was the most brilliant woman he had ever met. The man who had gotten down on one knee in Central Park and promised her forever. He would not meet her eyes. "Just sign, Ellie," Marcus said, examining his fingernails. "Take the money. Start over somewhere. Maybe you can go back to Iowa. Your aunt is still there, right?" Victoria added, "Surely $5,000 goes further in rural areas." The baby kicked again, harder this time. Arthur Higgins cleared his throat impatiently. "Mrs. Vance, we don't have all day." Emma stared at the papers in front of her. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic far below. She could fight this. She could demand a better settlement, drag things out in court, make them pay for every insult they had ever hurled at her. She was a lawyer, for God's sake. She knew her rights, but she also knew the Vances. She knew their money, their connections, their willingness to destroy anyone who got in their way. She had watched Marcus bury a competitor with a lawsuit so vicious the man had lost everything, including his marriage. She had seen Victoria smile at a charity gala while whispering instructions to have a difficult board member removed from their position. If she fought them, they would crush her, and they would enjoy doing it. Emma picked up the cheap ballpoint pen provided for her, ignoring the expensive fountain pen Arthur Higgins had laid beside it. Her hand did not shake. Her eyes remained dry. She signed her name. Emma Hartwell. Not Vance. She had never taken his name, had she? That small act of rebellion now felt like the smartest decision she had ever made. She stood up. "That's it?" Marcus's voice carried a note of surprise, maybe even disappointment. "No speech? No crying?" Emma walked to the door without responding. "She's finally learned her place," Victoria said to her son, satisfaction dripping from every word. Emma stopped. Her hand rested on the doorknob. She turned her head slightly, just enough to show her profile. Just enough for them to see her face. She smiled. It was not a sad smile, not bitter, not defeated. It was the smile of someone who knew something they did not. The smile of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, about to take a leap that would change everything. Then she opened the door and walked out. Behind her, the silence was deafening. "What was that?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a note of unease. Victoria frowned but waved her hand dismissively. "Nothing. She's nothing. Now, about the IPO celebration." Emma walked through the lobby of the law firm, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished marble floor. With each step, something changed. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted. The shuffling gait of a beaten woman transformed into something steadier, more purposeful. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. An unknown number. A single message. "Black car outside. Your father's debt is paid." Emma stopped in the middle of the lobby, her heart suddenly pounding. Her father had died 22 years ago when she was just 10 years old. A heart attack, the doctor said. "Stress," they whispered. But what debt? Her father had been an inventor, a dreamer, a man who spent his nights in a cluttered workshop tinkering with ideas that never seemed to pay the bills. What debt could possibly connect him to a black car waiting outside? Emma pushed through the revolving doors and stepped onto the sidewalk. The Seattle rain hit her immediately, cold and relentless. It soaked through her thin dress within seconds, plastering the fabric to her pregnant belly. She stood there, shivering, staring at her phone, trying to make sense of the message. Behind her, the revolving doors spun again. Marcus emerged first, sharing a large umbrella with Arthur Higgins. Victoria followed under her own umbrella, a Burberry print that probably cost more than Emma's entire wardrobe. A red Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, revealing a beautiful young woman with perfect makeup and a smile that could sell toothpaste. Jessica Lane, Marketing VP Advanced Tech, 28 years old, and for the past year, Marcus's mistress. Emma had known about the affair for 6 months. She had found the text messages, the hotel receipts, the lingerie from agent provocateur that had definitely not been purchased for her. "There she is," Marcus said loudly, deliberately making sure Emma could hear. "My future." Jessica waved from the car. "Babe, Victoria, come on, it's pouring." Victoria walked toward the Mercedes, then paused. She turned back to look at Emma, standing alone in the rain like a drowned rat. "You know," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular blend of cruelty and politeness and that only the truly wealthy could master. "I never understood what Marcus saw in you. No family, no money, no ambition, just adequate looks and a law degree you never used." She reached into her purse and pulled out a handful of coins, quarters, dimes, pennies. "For the bus, dear, consider it a parting gift." Victoria tossed the coins at Emma's feet. They scattered across the wet concrete, pinging and rolling in the rain. Emma said nothing. She did not bend to pick them up. She did not react at all. She simply stood there, letting the rain wash over her, her green eyes fixed on the woman who had spent 3 years making her feel worthless. "Come on, Mother," Marcus called from the Mercedes. "Let her figure it out." The car pulled away, red taillights disappearing into the gray Seattle afternoon. Emma stood alone on the sidewalk. The coins glittered at her feet like tiny accusations. She was soaked to the bone, 6 months pregnant, with exactly $1,247 to her name and nowhere to go. This was rock bottom. And then she heard it, a low hum, different from the traffic, deeper, more powerful. A car rounded the corner. Not just any car, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight blue so dark it was almost black. The chrome grille gleamed despite the gray weather. It moved through the traffic like a shark gliding through water, silent, inevitable. It did not stop at the hotel across the street. It did not stop at the bank. It stopped directly in front of Emma. The rear window rolled down with a soft electronic whisper. A man's face appeared, distinguished, silver hair, kind eyes with steel behind them. He looked to be in his late 50s, the kind of man who had clearly lived through some things and come out stronger on the other side. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice warm but serious. "I'm Richard Cole. I was your father's best friend, and I believe it's time we talked about what was stolen from you." Emma stared at the stranger in the Rolls-Royce. Rain dripped from her hair, ran down her face, soaked into her ruined dress. She was shivering now, whether from cold or shock, she could not tell. "I don't know you," she said. Richard Cole smiled gently. "No, but I've known you your whole life. I promised your father I would watch over you. I've kept that promise, even when you made it difficult." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a photograph, holding it out through the open window. Emma hesitated, then stepped forward to take it, shielding it from the rain with her hand. The photo was old, slightly faded. Two young men in their early 20s, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the easy confidence of youth. One of them was unmistakably her father, James Hartwell. Younger than she had ever known him, but those kind eyes, that slight quirk of his smile. She would recognize him anywhere. The other man was a younger version of Richard Cole. "Your father was the best man I ever knew," Richard said, his voice carrying a weight of emotion that seemed genuine. "And because the company that just threw you away, it was built on his stolen work." Emma's head snapped up. "What?" "Get in the car, Emma. It's time you learned the truth about your family." She should not get in. She knew that. You do not climb into cars with strangers, even strangers who claim to have known your dead father. That was basic survival. But something in his eyes stopped her. Something familiar. Something that reminded her of the way her father used to look at her, with a mixture of pride and protectiveness that she had not seen in any other man's eyes since. And there was the message: your father's debt is paid. Emma looked down at the coins scattered at her feet. Then she looked at the Rolls Royce, at the man who claimed to hold answers to questions she had not known to ask. Somewhere behind her, the traffic light changed. Cars honked. Life went on. Emma got in the car. The interior was everything the exterior promised. Cream leather seats that seemed to embrace her. Soft ambient lighting that felt like a warm hug. The smell of expensive leather and subtle cologne. It was the kind of luxury she had glimpsed occasionally during her marriage to Marcus, but never truly experienced. A privacy partition separated them from the driver. Richard pressed a button, and the car began to move. "There's a blanket in the compartment beside you," he said, gesturing, "and hot tea in the console. You're soaking wet and pregnant. Please." Emma found both items exactly where he indicated. She wrapped the cashmere blanket around her shoulders and took a sip of tea. It was perfect, just the right temperature. English breakfast with a hint of honey. How did he know how she took her tea? "You've been watching me," she said. It was not a question. "For over 20 years, Richard admitted. Since your father died." "Why?" Richard was quiet for a moment. The car glided through downtown Seattle, insulated from the chaos of traffic and rain. "Your father, James Hartwell, was a genius," he began. "We met at MIT. He was the inventor. I was the businessman. We were going to change the world together." He paused, and Emma saw real pain cross his features. "Then the accident happened. A drunk driver ran a red light. I was driving. Your mother was in the back seat." Emma's breath caught. She knew this story, but only fragments. Her father had never talked about it. Her grandparents had spoken of her mother in hushed tones, as if the very mention of her name might summon grief too large to contain. "She died," Emma whispered. "Instantly. I lost my leg." Richard shifted slightly, and Emma noticed for the first time the slight stiffness in his movements. "Your father pulled me from the wreckage. He saved my life, but he lost the woman he loved, and I have never forgiven myself for being behind that wheel." The car turned onto the freeway, heading away from downtown. "Your father never blamed me," Richard continued. "Not once. But he was never the same after that. He threw himself into his work. Invention after invention. Patents that I now know were decades ahead of their time. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks. In 1993, your father was writing algorithms that Silicon Valley would not understand for another 20 years. Emma thought of her childhood memories, her father in his workshop, the smell of solder and coffee, his hands moving across keyboards and circuit boards with a kind of magic she had not understood. He needed a business partner, Richard said, someone to handle the commercial side while he focused on the technology. I was still recovering, multiple surgeries, 2 years of rehabilitation. So he turned to someone else. A cold feeling began to settle in Emma's stomach. She already knew what was coming. "Howard Vance," she said. Richard nodded. "Marcus's father. He was charming, convincing. He promised your father that together they would revolutionize the technology industry." His voice hardened. "And then he stole everything." The car pulled off the freeway and wound through a wealthy neighborhood. Massive estates hidden behind tall hedges and iron gates. Howard convinced James to sign over temporary rights to his patents while James was drowning in medical bills from your mother's funeral. Your father was grieving, distracted, trusting. He didn't read the fine print. By the time he realized what had happened, Howard had restructured everything. The patents were gone, transferred to a holding company that Howard controlled completely. Couldn't my father fight it in court? He tried, but Howard had money by then. Investors, lawyers. He buried your father in legal motions and countersuits. James spent his last savings trying to reclaim what was his. Richard's voice dropped. The stress killed him. Heart attack, the doctor said. But I know the truth. Howard Vance murdered your father as surely as if he had pulled a trigger. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. Not just for the father she had lost, but for the man she had not truly understood. She had always wondered why her childhood had been so modest, so careful with money, when her father was clearly brilliant. She had assumed he was simply a dreamer who could not translate ideas into income. The truth was so much worse. "And you," she asked, "why didn't you help him?" The pain that crossed Richard's face was genuine and raw. "I was still recovering. By the time I could walk again, James was dead and Howard had buried the evidence so deep that I couldn't prove anything. I hired investigators, lawyers, forensic accountants. For 20 years I had been building a case." The car stopped in front of massive iron gates. Richard pressed a button and they swung open silently. "Until now," he continued, "I finally have enough. Every document, every trail, proof that the core technology behind Vance Tech, the patents that made them billions, belongs to your father, which means they belong to you." The car wound up a long driveway lined with old-growth trees. At the end sat a mansion that somehow managed to be both enormous and welcoming. Not the cold modernity of the Vance estate, but something older, warmer, a home rather than a showpiece. "Vance Tech is about to go public," Richard said as the car stopped in front of the main entrance. "Their IPO will value them at $8 billion. But if those patents are challenged, if it comes out that the entire company is built on fraud, it all collapses." A staff member appeared with an umbrella, opening Emma's door. She did not move yet. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" she asked. Richard's smile was sad. "I tried. When you graduated law school, I offered to fund your career. You refused." Emma's mind raced back. The anonymous scholarship that had appeared just when she needed it. The interview at Mitchell and Associates that had seemed too good to be true. The apartment she had won in a lottery she did not remember entering. "That was you," she breathed. "All of it. I wanted to help, but you were so determined to do everything yourself. I respected that. I respected you." His voice hardened. "But Emma, you married into the family that destroyed yours, and now they've thrown you away like garbage. You've done it on your own long enough." He handed her a thick folder. Heavy, important. "Everything you need is in here. Money, lawyers, access. But Emma." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I won't do this for you. I'll give you the weapons. You have to pull the trigger yourself." Emma looked at the folder in her hands, at the evidence of her father's stolen legacy, at the proof that Marcus's entire empire was built on her family's bones. She thought about the conference room, the coins scattered at her feet, Victoria's smug smile, Marcus's cold indifference to the child growing inside her. Her child, a Vance by blood, but a Hartwell by legacy. She touched her belly, felt the flutter of movement within. "I want them to lose everything," she said quietly. "They will. And I want Victoria to know it was me. Not you, me. She will." Emma looked up. Her eyes were dry now, clear, focused. "Then let's begin." Inside the mansion, she met Walter Briggs, Richard's head of security, a former FBI agent with silver hair and the quiet competence of a man who had seen everything and feared nothing. He showed her to a private suite, fully stocked with clothes in her size and everything a pregnant woman might need. She showered, changed into soft, comfortable clothes that fit properly for the first time in months, ate a meal prepared by Richard's private chef, slept for 12 hours in a bed that felt like a cloud, and the next morning she sat down in Richard's home office and began to read. The folder contained everything. Patent filings from 1991, corporate transfer documents with forged signatures, bank records showing payments to lawyers who had buried the truth, email correspondence between Howard Vance and his attorneys discussing how to handle the Hartwell problem. It was all there, 20 years of evidence, painstakingly compiled. And at the bottom of the folder, a handwritten letter. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, it means my friend Richard has finally found a way to give you the truth. I am sorry I could not fight harder. I am sorry I left you so young. But know this, everything I created for you. My patents, my work, my dreams. They were all meant to be your inheritance. Whatever the world has told you about failure and success, know that your father was brilliant, and he was stolen from. You are not the daughter of a failed dreamer. You are the heir to an empire, Go take what is yours. All my love, Dad. Emma read the letter 3 times, then she pressed it to her chest and let herself cry. When the tears were done, she dried her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and looked at Richard. Tell me everything I need to know, she said. I'm going to destroy them. 2 weeks after the divorce, Emma Hartwell looked like a different person. She had cut her hair, not dramatically, just enough to signal change. The exhaustion was still there, visible in the shadows beneath her eyes, but it had transformed into something else. Determination. Focus. The sharp intellect of a woman who had graduated top of her class from Northwestern Law was waking up after a 3-year hibernation. She was staying at a brownstone in Capitol Hill, one of several properties Richard owned throughout Seattle. Not a mansion, not luxury beyond reason, just a comfortable private space where she could work without interruption. And work she did. Emma sat at a desk surrounded by legal pads, case files, and a laptop that glowed with research tabs. Her old professor, Margaret Porter, sat across from her, reading through Emma's latest draft. Maggie was 60 years old, sharp as a scalpel, and one of the only people Emma had maintained contact with after leaving her career. She had been Emma's mentor at Northwestern and had spent the past week helping her rust-covered legal skills shine again. This is good, Maggie said, flipping through the patent challenge filing. Really good. Your analysis of the chain of title issues is airtight. It needs to be, Emma replied, rubbing her lower back. 7 months pregnant now, and her body was making its complaints known. Victoria Vance has access to the best lawyers in the country. Any weakness, any gap, they'll exploit it. You could hire people for this, you know. Maggie looked up over her reading glasses. Richard Cole has essentially unlimited resources. You could have an army of associates doing this grunt work. Emma shook her head. I need to understand every piece of this myself. If I'm going to stand in court and argue this case, I can't be depending on someone else's analysis. Maggie smiled. That's the Emma Hartwell I remember. Stubborn to a fault. Thorough, Emma corrected. There's a difference. She stood up to stretch, walking to the window that overlooked the quiet street below. Rain again. Always rain in Seattle, but she had stopped minding it. The gray skies matched her mood, and there was something cleansing about the constant water washing everything clean. I've been thinking about strategy, Emma said. If I file a direct lawsuit, Victoria will know immediately. She'll mobilize. They'll bury me in motions before I can even get discovery. So what's the alternative? I go to the patent office first, file a quiet complaint, request a formal review of the original Hartwell patents and their transfer documentation. Emma turned to face Maggie. It triggers an automatic hold on any corporate transactions involving those patents. Maggie's eyes widened as she understood. The IPO. Exactly. Vance Tech can't go public if their core intellectual property is under dispute. It would expose them to massive shareholder liability. That's clever. Maggie nodded slowly. You freeze their biggest opportunity without firing a direct shot. They won't even know who's attacking them at first. By the time they figure it out, I'll have what I need. Emma returned to her desk and pulled up a calendar on her laptop. The IPO is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. If I file Monday, the hold will be in place by Wednesday. The news will leak by Friday. And then we watch them panic. Monday came gray and cold. Emma dressed carefully. Professional clothes that accommodated her pregnant belly, but still projected competence. She had not worn a suit in over 3 years, and she was surprised by how natural it felt. Like putting on armor she had forgotten she owned. Walter Briggs drove her to the federal building downtown. He did not ask questions, did not offer opinions. He simply opened the door, escorted her inside, and waited in the lobby while she conducted her business. The filing itself took less than an hour. Paperwork, signatures. A clerk who looked bored until she saw the names involved and then looked nervous. Emma handed over copies of the evidence Richard had compiled, enough to justify the formal review, but not enough to show her entire hand. This will take some time to process, the clerk said carefully. I understand, Emma replied. Just make sure it's handled properly. She left the building feeling lighter than she had in years. The first move had been made. The game was in motion. Now she had to wait. Wednesday morning, Emma woke to her phone buzzing. Text from Richard. Turn on financial news. She grabbed the remote and switched on the television in her small living room. The morning business show was already running breaking news graphics. Vance Tech IPO hits unexpected snag, the anchor was saying. Sources indicate that a patent dispute has triggered an automatic review, freezing the company's ability to proceed with its planned public offering. Analysts are stunned by the development, which comes just weeks before the company was set to become one of the largest tech IPOs in Seattle history. Emma sat down slowly, her hand on her belly. The baby kicked, strong and definite, like a celebration. "We did it, sweetheart," Emma whispered. "We started." Her phone rang. "Richard, are you watching?" he asked. "I'm watching. How do you feel?" Emma considered the question. On screen, financial analysts were speculating wildly about who might have filed the complaint. Competitors were mentioned, foreign governments, industrial espionage. No one mentioned James Hartwell's daughter. "I feel," Emma said slowly, "like I'm finally fighting back. This is just the beginning. They'll figure out it's you eventually." "I know, but by then I'll be ready." At Advanced Tech headquarters, chaos reigned. Marcus stood in his corner office, staring at the financial news coverage with his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. Arthur Higgins was on speakerphone, his oily voice carrying through the room. "We don't know who filed it," Arthur was saying. "The complaint is sealed. It could be anyone." "I don't care who it is," Marcus snapped. "I care about fixing it. The IPO is my entire future. My investors are already calling. The board is meeting in 2 hours. These things take time, Marcus. The patent office review process. I don't have time." The office door opened. Victoria Vance entered, immaculate as always, in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's mortgages. But there was something in her eyes that Marcus did not often see. Fear. "Leave us," Victoria said to her son. "Mother, this is my company." "I said leave us. I need to speak with Arthur privately." Marcus stared at his mother for a long moment. Then, jaw still clenched, he turned and walked out. Victoria closed the door behind him. She picked up the phone, taking Arthur off speaker. "Arthur, listen to me very carefully. I need you to find out who filed that complaint. Use every resource we have. Victoria, patent filings are sealed. I don't care if you have to bribe half of Washington. Find out who it is." A pause on the other end of the line. "You think you know," Arthur said slowly. "Don't you?" Victoria walked to the window, looked out at the Seattle skyline, at the gray clouds rolling in from the sound. "I think," she said quietly, "that the past is coming back to haunt us." "What past? Victoria, what aren't you telling me?" Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Howard made certain decisions, 30 years ago, decisions that I have spent my entire life protecting." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that build empires and the kind that create enemies." Who would have waited 30 years to? Victoria thought about the Rolls-Royce she had seen from the back of Marcus's car, the license plate with the Cole family crest, the glimpse of a pregnant woman sliding into the back seat. "Find out if Richard Cole has had any contact with Emma Hartwell," Victoria said finally. "Emma, your daughter-in-law? I thought she was nobody." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "She's James Hartwell's daughter." Silence on the line. "Oh," Arthur breathed. "Oh, that's bad." "Yes, it is, which is why I need you to find out everything, immediately." "And if it is her? If Emma is behind this?" Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the window. Old, tired, but not beaten. Not yet. "Then we destroy her," Victoria said. "Whatever it takes." Emma spent the rest of the week preparing. She met with Maggie every day, refining her legal strategy. She reviewed every document in Richard's files, memorizing details that might become important later. She ate properly, slept as much as her racing mind would allow, and tried to manage the stress that was never far from the surface. On Friday evening, she was reviewing case law when her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. It wasn't from Richard. She had his number now. Emma opened the message. "I know it was you. This isn't over." Emma stared at the screen. Her heart rate spiked, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. Victoria knew. The first battle had been won, but now the real war would begin. She thought about responding, considered several options. Denial. Defiance. A clever comeback that would put Victoria in her place. Instead, she put the phone down. She said nothing. Let Victoria wonder. Let her fear the silence. Let her spend sleepless nights imagining what Emma might do next. That night, Emma dreamed of her father. He was in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and papers of his trade. He looked up at her and smiled. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm scared," she admitted. "That's okay. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. What if I lose? What if they destroy me like they destroyed you?" Her father stood up and crossed to where she stood. He placed his hand on her shoulder. It felt warm, real. "You're not alone this time," he said. "And you're not broken. You're a Hartwell. We don't stay down." Emma woke with tears on her pillow and determination in her heart. The first victory had been won, but she knew with absolute certainty that the hard part was just beginning. Victoria Vance had not survived 64 years of corporate warfare by being passive. Within 48 hours of discovering that Emma was behind the patent complaint, she had mobilized every resource at her disposal. Private investigators, media contacts, political connections cultivated over decades of charitable donations and strategic friendships. If Emma wanted a war, Victoria would give her one. The first salvo came on a Tuesday morning. Emma was eating breakfast when Maggie called, her voice tight with concern. "Turn on Channel 5. Now." Emma grabbed the remote. The morning news was running a special segment. Her stomach dropped as she saw the headline. "Bitter ex-wife's revenge scheme. Emma Vance working with rival billionaire to tank husband's company." A news anchor with perfect hair and a concerned expression was speaking directly into the camera. "New details are emerging in the Vance Tech patent dispute that has rocked Seattle's business community. Sources close to the company say that the anonymous complaint was actually filed by Emma Vance, the recently divorced wife of CEO Marcus Vance. Even more shocking, sources allege that Ms. Vance has been working closely with billionaire Richard Cole, raising questions about the nature of their relationship." The screen cut to a grainy photograph. Emma and Richard entering his mansion. The angle made it look intimate, scandalous. Neither Ms. Vance nor Mr. Cole were available for comment, but the implications are clear. This appears to be a personal vendetta, not a legitimate legal dispute. Emma's phone started buzzing, notifications flooding in. She checked social media and immediately wished she had not. The hashtag gold digger. Emma was trending. Comments poured in from strangers who had never met her and never would. "She's just angry she got caught cheating. Classic bitter ex-wife move. That baby probably isn't even his." Imagine being so petty you try to destroy your ex's company. Gold digger couldn't get enough in the divorce. Now she's going after everything. Emma set the phone down. Her hands were shaking. Maggie arrived an hour later, finding Emma still sitting in the same chair, staring at the wall. "Emma, talk to me." "They're saying I had an affair with Richard." Emma's voice sounded hollow. "They're questioning the paternity of my baby again. It's a smear campaign. Classic tactics. Attack the messenger when you can't attack the message." "It's working." Emma gestured at her phone, which had not stopped buzzing. "Everyone believes it. Hashtag gold digger Emma. That's what people think of me." Maggie sat down across from her, leaning forward with intensity. "Emma, you need to respond. Put out a statement. Get ahead of this before the narrative sets. If I respond, I validate it. I look defensive. If you don't respond, they win by default." Richard called shortly after. Emma stared at the phone for 3 rings before answering. "I can bury this," Richard said without preamble. "One call to the right people, and this story disappears." Emma closed her eyes. It would be so easy. Let Richard use his money and power to make it all go away. Let someone else fight her battles. "No," she said finally. "This is my fight. I'll handle it." "Emma, your reputation is already damaged. Letting you fix it would only prove them right. They're saying I'm using you to destroy Marcus. If you make this go away, that's exactly what it looks like." A long pause. "What are you going to do?" Richard asked. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." She hung up before he could argue further. That night was the worst. Emma sat alone in the brownstone, all the lights off, hand resting on her belly. The baby was quiet, as if sensing her mother's distress. Outside, the rain had stopped. The silence felt oppressive. Emma cried. She had not cried when Marcus served her with divorce papers. She had not cried when Victoria threw coins at her feet. She had not cried through any of the humiliations of the past 3 years. But now, alone in the dark, with the whole world seeming to hate her, she finally broke. The tears came in waves. For her father, who had died broken and stolen from. For her mother, dead before Emma could form memories of her. For the woman she had been, the brilliant lawyer who had given up everything for a man who never deserved her. For the baby growing inside her, who might be born into a world where her mother was remembered as a gold-digging fraud. The baby kicked. Hard. Insistent. Emma gasped, her hand pressing against the movement. She felt tiny limbs pushing against her palm, reminding her that she was not alone. "I know, sweetheart," Emma whispered. "I know. We're not giving up." She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, then another. The despair was still there, but something else was growing alongside it. Something harder, more determined. They wanted her to be silent, to disappear in shame and let them control the narrative. But Emma Hartwell was done being silent in the way they expected. Her silence would be a weapon, not a surrender. She reached for her laptop and began to type. The next morning, Emma called Karen Wells. Karen was 45 years old, a veteran investigative reporter for the Seattle Tribune. She had made her career destroying corrupt corporations and exposing powerful people who thought they were untouchable. She was tough, skeptical, and notoriously difficult to manipulate. She was exactly what Emma needed. They met at a coffee shop in Ballard, far from downtown. Karen arrived in jeans and a leather jacket, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked at Emma's pregnant belly, then at her face, and sat down without pleasantries. "I've seen the coverage," Karen said. "Rough week." "I have a story for you," Emma replied. "Not about me, about Vance Tech, about stolen patents, about a family that built an empire on fraud." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I've heard the rumors about you, Mrs. Vance." "It's Hartwell, Emma Hartwell, and everything you've heard is a lie created to discredit me. Here's the truth." Emma slid Richard's folder across the table. Karen looked at it for a moment, then began to read. For the next 2 hours, Emma walked her through everything: the original patents, the fraudulent transfer documents, the timeline that proved Vance Tech's core technology had been stolen from a dying man. Karen asked hard questions, challenged inconsistencies, pushed Emma on every claim. Emma answered all of it, calmly, thoroughly, with the precision of a lawyer who had done her homework. When Karen finally looked up from the documents, her expression had changed. The skepticism was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Interest. "If this is real," Karen said slowly, "this is massive. It's real, and I'll go on record. Full name, full face. I want them to know it's me." "Why? You could stay anonymous. Let the documents speak for themselves." Emma thought about the hashtag, about the comments calling her a gold digger, about Victoria's smug certainty that she could destroy anyone who got in her way. "Because I'm not ashamed," Emma said. "My father was brilliant. He was stolen from. And I'm going to take back what belongs to my family. I want Victoria Vance to see my face when it happens." Karen studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, sharp and predatory. "Okay, Ms. Hartwell, let's burn it down." The story broke 3 days later. The Vance Tech fraud, how a grieving widow's patents were stolen to build a billion-dollar empire. The Seattle Tribune ran it as a front-page investigation. Karen Wells had done her work thoroughly, verifying every document, tracking down supporting sources, building a narrative of ideas that was both emotionally compelling and legally airtight. The story included everything: James Hartwell's original patent filings, documents showing Howard Vance's fraudulent transfer, a timeline proving that Vance Tech's core technology existed in Hartwell's workshop 20 years before the company was founded, and Emma, full name, full face, full story, the daughter of the stolen inventor, seeking justice. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the hashtag Justice for Hartwell was trending. Then Vance fraud. The same internet that had attacked Emma days earlier now rallied to her defense. Think pieces appeared about corporate theft and the exploitation of inventors. Legal experts weighed in on the patent claims. Business journalists demanded accountability. The tide had turned. Advanced Tech headquarters, Marcus watched the coverage with the look of a man watching his house burn down. "This can't be true," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Father was a good man. He built this company from nothing." Victoria stood by the window, her back to her son. She had not spoken since the story broke. "Mother, Owen," Marcus's voice cracked. "Did you know about this?" Victoria turned. Her face was a mask, but her eyes were calculating. Always calculating. "Go to your office, Marcus." "Did you know?" "I said go to your office." Marcus stared at his mother, the woman who had raised him, shaped him, controlled him. "You knew," he breathed. "You've always known." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Don't be naive. How did you think we built this company? Your father wasn't a genius, Marcus. He was an opportunist. And I have spent 40 years protecting his legacy, our legacy, by lying to me for my entire life, by giving you everything, a company, a fortune, a name. Do you have any idea what it cost me to maintain all of this?" Marcus backed away from his mother as if she were a stranger, which perhaps she was. "What have you done?" he whispered. "What I had to do. What I will continue to do. Now go to your office and let me handle this." Marcus left. Victoria turned back to the window, watching the city below. Her city, her empire, everything she had built and protected and killed for. She picked up her phone and dialed Jessica Lane's personal number. "We have a problem," Victoria said when Jessica answered. "Come to my office, now." At the brownstone, Emma watched the coverage with something approaching disbelief. She had expected pushback, arguments, maybe even a counterattack. Instead, the narrative had shifted completely. The same media that had called her a gold digger was now calling her a crusader for justice. Maggie arrived with champagne, non-alcoholic for Emma. "You did it," Maggie said, pouring herself a glass. "You actually did it." "Not yet," Emma allowed herself a small smile. "This is just the beginning. Victoria won't give up this easily." "Let her try. You have the truth on your side now." Emma touched her belly. The baby kicked, strong and certain. "We're going to be okay, sweetheart," Emma whispered. "We're going to be okay." For the first time in weeks, she believed it. She did not know that 6 blocks away, in a gleaming office tower, Victoria Vance was plotting a counterattack that would make everything that came before look like a warm-up. She did not know that Jessica Lane had connections at Emma's doctor's office and that money was about to change hands. She did not know that the worst was yet to come. But for now, in this moment, Emma allowed herself to feel something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Jessica Lane was many things, but stupid was not one of them. She had watched the Vance Tech saga unfold with the calculating eye of a chess player studying a losing game. The patent scandal, the plummeting stock valuations, the board of directors' emergency meetings that left Marcus looking grayer and more desperate each day. The ship was sinking, and Jessica had no intention of going down with it, but she also had no intention of walking away empty-handed. 3 years of her life she had invested in this play. 3 years of sleeping with a married man, pretending to care about his tedious business problems, putting up with his mother's condescending approval. She deserved compensation, which was why she was sitting in Victoria Vance's office at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, discussing options. "The media is destroying us," Victoria said, pacing the length of her office. The composed, controlled woman of a week ago was showing cracks. "Karen Wells has more documents. There's going to be a follow-up story. The board is talking about asking Marcus to step down." "What about Emma?" Jessica asked. "Can we discredit her story?" "We tried that. It didn't work. She came back stronger. So we need something stronger, something that can't be explained away." Victoria stopped pacing. She looked at Jessica with an expression that was part desperation, part calculation. "What are you suggesting?" Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping. "The paternity question. We raised it during the divorce proceedings, but we didn't have any proof, just suspicions. Because there's nothing to prove. The baby is Marcus's. Does it matter if we can create enough doubt, if we can get medical records that suggest otherwise? Medical records are protected. Accessing them illegally is a federal crime. I know." Jessica smiled, the same smile that had first attracted Marcus, all surface charm and hidden edges. But so is patent fraud. What's one more? Victoria was silent for a long moment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle skyline glittered indifferently. "You know someone," Victoria said finally, "at her doctor's office." "I know someone everywhere. It's my job." Jessica pulled out her phone. "For the right price, we can get access to Emma's prenatal records. We find something, anything that suggests complications, inconsistencies, timeline issues. We leak it to the tabloids. Suddenly, the story isn't about patent fraud anymore. It's about Emma Hartwell's lies. And if there's nothing in the records?" Jessica's smile widened. "Then we create something. Medical documents can be altered. Paper trails can be manufactured. By the time anyone proves it's fake, the damage will be done." Victoria should have said no. She knew that. Whatever she had done, whatever lines she had crossed, she had never directly targeted a pregnant woman before. But desperation makes monsters of us all. "Do it," Victoria said, "whatever it takes." 3 days later, Emma woke to a nightmare. She had been sleeping better lately. The stress was still there, but the success of the Tribune story had given her something to hold on to. Progress. Hope. Then she checked her phone. The headline screamed from every tabloid news site. "Sterling heiress's secret. Medical records suggest baby may not be Marcus Vance's." Emma's blood turned to ice. She scrolled through the article with shaking hands. It cited leaked medical documents, suggesting that Emma had undergone fertility treatments before her marriage. Treatments that supposedly used donor material. The documents were detailed, convincing, official-looking, and completely fabricated. Em had never had fertility treatments. She had never needed them. She had gotten pregnant naturally 3 months after deciding with Marcus that they should start a family. The timing was perfect. The paternity was unquestionable. But that would not matter to the people reading this story. She called her doctor immediately. The receptionist sounded nervous. "Ms. Hartwell, Dr. Patterson has been trying to reach you. There was a security breach. Someone accessed your records illegally." "I know," Emma said, her voice tight. "I'm reading about it right now." She hung up and called Richard. He answered on the first ring. "I know," Richard said before she could speak. "I'm sending lawyers. We'll find out who did this, and I don't want your lawyers." The words came out harsher than she intended, but she could not take them back, could not stop the rage and fear that were threatening to overwhelm her. "Emma, this is my fight, mine, I'll handle it." She hung up. She was hyperventilating now. The room seemed to spin around her, and then the pain hit. Sharp, sudden, like someone had driven a spike through her abdomen. Emma doubled over, gasping, her vision blurred. Her hands went to her belly automatically, protectively. "No," she whispered, "not now, please. Not now." She reached for her phone, tried to dial. Her fingers would not cooperate. The room tilted. The floor rushed up to meet her. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was the sound of her phone clattering across the hardwood. Emma woke in a hospital bed. White ceiling, fluorescent lights, the steady beep of monitors tracking her vital signs. For a moment, she did not remember anything. Then it all came rushing back. The story, the pain, the fall, the baby. "The baby," Emma gasped, trying to sit up. "Is the baby easy?" "Easy." Maggie's face appeared above her, lined with worry. "The baby is fine. You're both fine." Emma collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" "Stress-induced blood pressure spike. You fainted and hit your head on the way down. The doctors say you need to rest. Complete bed rest. No more fighting, no more stress." "I can't stop. If I stop now, they win. They take everything my father built, and they get away with it." Maggie took Emma's hand, squeezing hard enough to make her pay attention. "Emma, your father would want you alive. He would want his grandchild to have a mother. Whatever revenge you're planning, it's not worth dying for." Emma turned her face away. The tears kept coming. She was 7 months pregnant. Her reputation was in ruins. Again, her party was failing. And Victoria Vance was out there somewhere, probably celebrating her victory. This was worse than rock bottom. This was the abyss. Emma lay in that hospital bed for 3 days. She did not respond to calls, did not read the news coverage, or check the email, did not do anything except stare at the ceiling and feel her baby move inside her. On the third day, she asked Maggie to bring her laptop. Emma, the doctors said, I need to read something, just for a few minutes. Maggie brought the computer, watching anxiously as Emma opened it. But Emma did not go to the news sites, did not check social media, did not look at any of the coverage that was tearing her apart. Instead, she opened a folder labeled Dad and clicked on a scanned document. It was a letter James Hartwell had written to her on her 10th birthday, 2 weeks before his death. My dearest Emma, you turned 10 today, and I cannot believe how fast time has gone. It seems like yesterday you were a tiny baby in my arms, and now you're this brilliant, determined, stubborn girl who argues with me about everything. I love that about you. Never lose that fire. I know I'm not the best father. I get lost in my work. I forget birthdays and recitals and important things. Your mother used to keep me grounded, but since she's been gone, I've been drifting. But I want you to know something I might not say enough. You are the best thing I ever created, better than any invention, better than any patent. Whatever happens in my life, whatever failures or successes come and go, you will always be my greatest achievement. Be brave, sweetheart. Be smart. Be kind. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small. I love you to the moon and back. Dad. And Mom read the letter 3 times, then she closed the laptop and looked at Maggie. I've been fighting this like a victim, Emma said slowly, responding to their attacks, playing defense. What's the alternative? I'm a lawyer, a good one. I need to stop reacting and start prosecuting. She pushed herself up in the bed, ignoring the dizziness. Someone accessed my medical records illegally. That's a federal crime. The hospital has logs, digital trails, security cameras. Maggie's eyes widened. You want to find out who did it? I want to find out who ordered it, and I'm willing to bet it leads straight to Victoria. For the first time in days, Emma felt something other than despair. She felt like a lawyer again. Emma Hartwell had always been good at research. It was what had made her a successful lawyer, back when she was still allowed to be one. The ability to dig through mountains of information and find the one piece that mattered, to follow threads that others would have dismissed, to build cases from fragments. Now she lay in her bed at the brownstone, laptop open, legal pads scattered around her like fallen leaves. The doctors had ordered rest. She was resting. She was also working. The investigation started with the hospital breach. Every medical facility maintained logs of who accessed, what records, and when. It was basic HIPAA compliance. Emma requested her access logs through her doctor, citing the publicized breach. The results arrived within 48 hours. On the date in question, Emma's records had been accessed by a staff member named Brittany Hollister. Brittany was a medical billing specialist, 24 years old, 3 years at the practice. Emma ran a background check. Brittany had no criminal record, no history of selling information, nothing that suggested she was the mastermind of anything. But she had just made a large deposit into her checking account, $40,000, cash. Someone had paid her. The question was who? Emma traced the payment. It was not easy. Cash transactions were designed to be untraceable. But whoever had handled the handoff had made a mistake. They had coordinated by phone, and phones left records. Through Maggie's connections, Emma got access to Brittany's phone records. One number appeared repeatedly in the days before the breach. A number registered to a disposable phone, the kind you buy at convenience stores and throw away. But that phone had been activated at a specific store at a specific time, and that store had security cameras. Walter Briggs made a call. 24 hours later, Emma had the footage. The woman on camera buying the disposable phone was Jessica Lane. Emma stared at the image for a long time. Jessica. Of course. Victoria would never dirty her own hands. She would use someone expendable, someone already compromised by their involvement with Marcus. But Jessica had made a mistake. She had shown her face. Now Emma had leverage. The call came at 11 o'clock at night. Jessica was at home, a sleek apartment in Belltown that Marcus paid for. She was scrolling through job listings on her laptop, planning her exit strategy. The Vance ship was sinking fast, and she needed a lifeboat. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? I know what you did. Emma's voice was calm, cold, completely in control. Jessica's blood turned to ice. I don't know what you're talking about. Hospital footage, phone records, your name on the payment trail. Do you want me to continue? Silence. Jessica's mind raced through options. Denial, deflection, hanging up and running. Here's what's going to happen, Emma continued. You're going to turn on Victoria. You're going to give me everything, every conversation, every order, every piece of evidence of their fraud. And if I don't, then I file federal charges tomorrow morning. Medical record theft, conspiracy, wire fraud. You'll spend the next 5 to 10 years explaining to a cellmate why you thought this was a good idea. Jessica closed her eyes. 5 to 10 years, federal prison, her career, her life. What do I get? You get to walk away, no charges. You disappear from Seattle, and we never speak again. Long pause. In the silence, Jessica could hear her own heartbeat. Victoria recorded everything, Jessica said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Phone calls, meetings. She keeps records of everyone's dirt in case she needs leverage. It's in a safe in her home office. I know the combination. How? Because she made me memorize it in case something happened to her. I need copies, audio files, documents, everything. If she finds out I betrayed her, then you'd better make sure she doesn't find out until you're already gone. Jessica took a breath, then another. I'll send you everything tonight. Smart choice. Emma hung up. She sat in the darkness for a long moment, hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift and settle. Almost there, sweetheart, she whispered. Almost there. The files arrived at 2 in the morning. Emma opened the encrypted transfer with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of audio recordings, each one labeled with dates and participants. She clicked on the first one. Victoria's voice filled the room, crisp and controlled. The medical record scheme needs to happen quickly, before her story gains more traction. Jessica's voice responded. I have a contact at her doctor's office. For $40,000, she'll give us access. Do it. Make sure there's nothing that traces back to us. And if the documents don't show what we need? A pause. Then Victoria again. Then we create what we need. I have people who can manufacture convincing medical records. By the time anyone proves they're fake, the damage will be done. Emma stopped the recording. Her hands were trembling, but not from fear, from triumph. She clicked on another file. This one was older, dated from before Emma's marriage. The patent situation is secure, Victoria was saying to someone, possibly Howard, possibly a lawyer. All the Hartwell documentation has been destroyed. There's no evidence left that could challenge our ownership. What about the daughter? She's nobody, a struggling law student with no resources and no knowledge of what happened. She'll never be a threat. Emma smiled grimly. How wrong Victoria had been. The last recording was the most damaging. Victoria speaking to Arthur Higgins, discussing the original theft. Howard always said we had to protect the secret. If anyone found out where those patents really came from, well, we've come too far to let a dead man's daughter destroy everything. What about Cole? He's been sniffing around for years. Richard Cole can't prove anything. As long as the original documents stay buried, we're safe. And if the documents resurface? Victoria's laugh was bitter. Then we do what we've always done. Destroy whoever threatens us, whatever it takes. Emma was saved all the files, made copies, uploaded them to secure cloud storage with multiple backups. Then she called Richard. I have everything, she said. Victoria's voice, admitting to the medical record scheme, admitting to the original patent theft, discussing cover-ups and destruction of evidence. Silence on the other end. Then Richard's voice, rough with emotion. Your father would be proud. I'm going to finish this, in court, publicly. I want the world to hear what she did. When, Emma calculated, the patent hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. She would be 8 months pregnant by then. Huge. Uncomfortable. Perfect. The hearing, she said, I'm going to represent myself, and I'm going to play those recordings for everyone to hear. Are you sure you're up for it, physically? Emma touched her belly. The baby kicked, strong and certain. "I'm a Hartwell," she said. "We don't stay down." The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Emma worked 16-hour days, reviewing evidence, preparing arguments, anticipating every possible objection the Vance lawyers might raise. Maggie helped where she could, offering guidance on courtroom strategy and precedent. Richard stayed in the background, providing resources but never interfering. He understood that this was Emma's fight, her moment. Daniel Cole appeared at the brownstone one evening unexpected. Emma had met him once before, briefly, at Richard's mansion. Richard's son, 35 years old, handsome in a quieter way than Marcus, eyes that held both sadness and warmth. "Dad told me everything," Daniel said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "About your father, about what happened. Why are you here?" "Because I wanted to say I'm sorry, for not knowing, for not helping sooner." He paused. "And because I've thought about you every day since law school." Emma remembered they had dated briefly years ago, before Marcus swept into her life with his charm and his promises. She had broken things off with Daniel because he was going to London and she was staying in Seattle, and long distance never worked. She had wondered sometimes what might have happened if she had made a different choice. "You're here now," she said finally. "Is that enough?" "It's a start." She did not invite him in. It was not the time, but she also did not close the door. Some doors, she was learning, were worth leaving open. 2 days before the hearing, Victoria Vance disappeared. Not literally. She was still in Seattle, still in her mansion, still ostensibly running her life. But she had gone silent. No public appearances, no statements to the press, no strategic leaks or counterattacks. It was unnerving. "She's planning something," Emma said to Maggie, pacing the brownstone living room. "Victoria doesn't just give up. Maybe she knows she's beaten. Victoria has never been beaten in her life. She doesn't know how to accept defeat. Then what do you think she's doing?" Emma stopped pacing. She thought about everything she knew about Victoria Vance, the woman's ruthlessness, her willingness to destroy anyone who threatened her. "She's going to come after me at the hearing," Emma said slowly. "Something public, something dramatic, something that changes the narrative again." "You have the recordings. What could she possibly do?" Emma shook her head. She did not know, and that was what terrified her. The night before the hearing, Emma could not sleep. She lay in bed, hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move. 8 months pregnant now, so close to the finish line. "Tomorrow, sweetheart," Emma whispered. "Tomorrow we get justice, whoop-a-hog." The baby kicked, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Emma smiled despite everything. "I know," she said. "I know. You're ready. I'm ready too." She closed her eyes and tried to rest. Tomorrow, everything would change. The King County Courthouse was an imposing building of concrete and glass, designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. Emma arrived at 8:30 in the morning, an hour before the hearing was scheduled to begin. She wore a navy blue dress that accommodated her 8-month belly while projecting competence. Professional but not cold, determined but not aggressive. She had thought carefully about every aspect of her appearance, knowing that the courtroom was as much theater as law. The gallery was already filling when she entered. Journalists from every major outlet, financial analysts eager to see the outcome, curious spectators who had followed the drama on social media, and in the front row, watching her with expressions ranging from supportive to anxious, were her people. Richard Cole, Maggie Porter, Walter Briggs, and Daniel, who had shown up without being asked and positioned himself at the end of the row, close enough to help if needed, but far enough to respect her space. Marcus Vance was already seated at the defendant's table with his team of lawyers. He looked terrible, gray-faced and hollow-eyed. The golden boy had tarnished significantly in recent weeks. Emma felt a brief flicker of something that might have been sympathy, then extinguished it. He had made his choices. Now he had to live with them. Victoria Vance was notably absent. Emma took her place at the plaintiff's table, alone, no team of lawyers flanking her. Just Emma Hartwell, 8 months pregnant, representing herself against a corporate empire. The murmur in the gallery intensified. This was not what people expected. Judge Patricia Okonkwo entered precisely at 9:30. 62 years old, with silver-streaked natural hair and a reputation for fairness and impatience with games. She surveyed the courtroom with the calm authority of someone who had seen everything. This hearing concerns the matter of Hartwell versus Vance Technologies regarding patent ownership disputes. Counsel, please identify yourselves for the record. Marcus's lead lawyer stood. David Morrison for the defendant, Your Honor, along with my colleagues from Morrison and Foster. Emma rose, every eye in the room fixed on her. Emma Hartwell, representing myself, Your Honor. The murmur became a rumble. Judge Okonkwo silenced it with a look. Miss Hartwell, you understand you have the right to legal representation? I do, Your Honor. I am a licensed attorney. I choose to handle this matter myself. Very well, let's proceed. The morning session established the basic facts. Emma presented her father's original patent filings, dated 1991 and 92. She walked through the timeline of his work, the innovations he had developed, the paper trail that proved he had created the core technology years before Vance Tech existed. David Morrison did his best to challenge her evidence, question the authenticity of documents, raise procedural objections, tried to paint Emma as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. Emma countered each attack calmly, methodically. She cited case law, referenced precedent, exposed the weaknesses in his arguments with surgical precision. By lunch, the momentum had clearly shifted in her favor. Recess until 2 o'clock, Judge Okonkwo announced. Ms. Hartwell, I suggest you rest. You look tired. Thank you, Your Honor. Emma gathered her materials and walked toward the gallery. Richard fell into step beside her. You're doing brilliantly, he said quietly. It's not over yet. Victoria hasn't made her move. Maybe she won't. Emma shook her head. She will. I just don't know when. They found a quiet conference room where Emma could eat and prepare for the afternoon. Daniel brought her a sandwich from the courthouse cafe. Maggie reviewed the afternoon strategy. At 1:45, the door opened. Victoria Vance walked in. She looked immaculate as always. Cream suit, perfect hair, diamond earrings that caught the light. But there was something different about her expression. Something Emma had never seen before. Defeat. May I speak with you? Victoria asked. Alone? Emma looked at her allies. Richard's face was stone. Daniel moved slightly, positioning himself between Emma, and Victoria. Maggie stood up, ready to intervene. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of them, Emma replied. Victoria hesitated, then she nodded slowly. I came to offer a settlement, full recognition of your father's patents, complete ownership transfer to you, $40 million in damages. The room went silent. In exchange for what? Emma asked. You dropped the criminal charges. The recordings never become public. My name stays out of prison. Emma studied the woman who had made her life miserable for 3 years, the woman who had thrown coins at her feet, who had questioned her baby's paternity, who had tried to destroy her reputation with fabricated medical records. No, Emma said. Victoria's composure cracked. I'm offering you everything. The patents, the money, justice for your father. You're offering me silence. You want me to let you walk away from what you did, from the lies, the fraud, the attack on my medical records. Emma stood up, her hand on her belly. You tried to destroy me, Victoria. You tried to take away my reputation, my dignity, my baby's legitimacy, and you want me to let you buy your way out. I'm trying to end this, for both of us. No, you're trying to save yourself. Emma walked toward Victoria, stopping just a few feet away. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going back into that courtroom. I'm going to play those recordings for everyone to hear. And then the judge is going to refer you for criminal prosecution. You'll destroy Marcus too. He didn't know any of it. I know, and I'm genuinely sorry for that part. But he chose to believe his mother over his wife. He chose to throw me away rather than question the family business. He made his choices. Victoria's mask finally broke. Tears welled in her eyes. Please, she whispered, I'm begging you. It was strange. Emma had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Victoria Vance on her knees, broken, defeated. It did not feel as satisfying as she had expected. You should have thought about this before you stole my father's work, Emma said quietly. Before you destroyed his reputation and let him die believing he was a failure. Before you spent 40 years building your empire on his bones. She turned to Richard. Let's go back to the courtroom. The afternoon session began at 2 o'clock precisely. Emma returned to her table. Victoria took a seat in the gallery, her face once again composed into a mask of dignity. Whatever private devastation she was feeling, she would not show it publicly. Judge Okonkwo called the proceedings to order. Ms. Hartwell, you may continue your presentation. Emma stood. Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to submit. Audio recordings obtained from the defendant's own records, documenting conversations about the patent theft and subsequent cover-up. David Morrison leaped to his feet. Objection, we have no documentation of these supposed recordings. This is improper evidence introduction. The recordings were obtained legally, Emma replied, through a witness who is prepared to testify to their authenticity. The source was a former employee of Vance Technologies who had legitimate access to these files. Judge Okonkwo considered. I'll allow it, subject to authentication testimony. Play the recordings, Ms. Hartwell. Emma connected her laptop to the courtroom's audio system. Victoria's voice filled the room. The medical record scheme needs to happen quickly, before her story gains more traction. The gallery erupted. Journalists scribbled furiously. Camera phones appeared despite the rules against them. Emma let the recording play. Victoria discussing the $40,000 payment. Victoria authorizing the creation of fake medical documents. Victoria's cold calculation about destroying Emma's credibility. Then she played the older recording. Victoria discussing the original patent theft, confirming that Howard Vance had stolen James Hartwell's work, acknowledging the cover-up that had lasted 40 years. Howard always said we had to protect the secret. If anyone found out where those patents really came from, well, we've come too far to let a dead man's daughter destroy everything. When the recordings finished, the courtroom was utterly silent. Marcus Vance sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Whether he was crying or simply overwhelmed, Emma could not tell. Judge Okonkwo spoke into the silence. Is there any challenge to the authenticity of these recordings? David Morrison looked at Victoria. Victoria said nothing. No, Your Honor, David Morrison finally said, his voice defeated. Judge Okonkwo nodded slowly. Based on the evidence presented, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The patents in question rightfully belong to the estate of James Hartwell, and by extension to his daughter, Emma Hartwell. Vance Technologies' IPO is permanently blocked pending resolution of all ownership transfers. She turned to Victoria. Mrs. Victoria Vance, the recordings presented today suggest multiple federal crimes, and a howling fraud conspiracy and violations of medical privacy laws. I am referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for investigation. Two federal marshals moved toward the Victoria. Mrs. Vance, you are to surrender your passport immediately. You are not to leave the state of Washington. Victoria stood. For a moment, she locked eyes with Emma across the courtroom. There was no hatred in her gaze, no defiance, just exhaustion. Then she turned to face the marshals, offering her wrists with the dignity of a queen going to the gallows. I understand, she said quietly. As the marshals led Victoria away, she passed Emma's table. She paused for just a moment. You're more like your father than I realized, Victoria said softly. He never gave up either. Emma said nothing. She simply watched as Victoria Vance, the woman who had terrorized her for 3 years, walked out of the courtroom in custody. The courthouse hallway was chaos after the hearing. Journalists shouted questions. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Security struggled to maintain some semblance of order. Emma pushed through the crowd, flanked by Richard and Daniel. She needed air, space, time to process what had just happened. Ms. Hartwell, how does it feel to win? Will you seek criminal charges against Marcus Vance as well? What are your plans for the Vance Tech patents? Emma said nothing. She kept walking, head down, moving toward the courthouse exit. Then a voice cut through the noise, a voice she knew. Emma, wait. She stopped, turned. Marcus Vance stood in the hallway looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. His expensive suit was rumpled. His eyes were red-rimmed. His hands trembled at his sides. The reporters went silent, sensing drama. I need to speak with you, Marcus said. Please. Emma considered refusing, walking away, leaving him to face the cameras alone. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not calculation, not manipulation, just genuine broken desperation. 5 minutes, she said. They found an empty conference room. Emma's allies waited outside. Through the glass walls, she could see Richard's tense posture, Daniel's watchful eyes. Marcus sat heavily in a chair, all pretense of dignity gone. I didn't know, he said, his voice cracking. About the patents, about your father. I swear to God, Emma, I didn't know any of it. Emma sat across from him, her hands resting on her belly. I believe you. Hope flickered in his eyes. Then maybe we can work something out. The company, what's left of it, we could restructure. Partners. You take controlling share, I handle operations. We could. No. The hope died. Emma, please. I have nothing. My accounts are frozen. My mother is going to prison. Jessica left. I have nothing. Emma reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope, placed it on the table between them. What is this? $5,000, Garen, and the keys to a 2014 Honda Civic. It's parked in the garage on level 2. Marcus stared at the envelope. Understanding dawned slowly, painfully. You're mocking me. I'm giving you what you deserve, what you gave me when I was pregnant and alone and terrified. You said it was generous then. I'm sure you'll find it generous now. Marcus's face contorted with something between anger and despair. You can't do this. That baby is mine. I have rights. That baby is a Hartwell. She will carry my father's name. Your parental rights will be terminated, assuming you don't want to fight it in court, where every piece of evidence about your family's fraud will become public record. She saw Marcus's lawyer enter through the glass, pulling his client aside, whispering urgently. Marcus deflated. You're going to raise my child to hate me, he said quietly. No. Emma stood up. I'm going to raise her to not think about you at all. She walked to the door. Say something. Marcus's voice cracked behind her. Yell at me. Tell me you hate me. Just... Emma paused with her hand on the doorknob. She said nothing. Then she opened the door and walked out, leaving Marcus Vance alone with the ruins of his life. The walk to the courthouse exit felt like a dream. Emma moved through the remaining reporters without acknowledging them, through the security checkpoint, through the massive glass doors and onto the courthouse steps. The Seattle sun had broken through the clouds. Actual sunlight, warm on her face. Richard appeared beside her, Daniel on her other side, Maggie just behind. It's over, Richard said softly. Emma shook her head. Not over. Different. There's still the patent transfer to finalize, criminal proceedings to navigate, a company to figure out what to do with. But you won. She touched her belly. The baby shifted, settling into a new position. We won, she corrected. That night, Emma slept better than she had in months. No dreams, no nightmares, just deep, restful darkness. She woke at dawn to find a message from Maggie. News coverage is overwhelmingly positive. You're being called the comeback story of the decade. Also, Victoria was denied bail. She's staying in custody until trial. Emma read the message twice. Then she set down the phone and walked to the window. Seattle stretched out before her. The Space Needle in the distance, the Puget Sound sparkling in the early light. A city that had witnessed her humiliation and her triumph. Her father had lived in this city, dreamed in this city, died in this city. Now his daughter would rebuild what was stolen. I did it, Dad, she whispered to the empty room. I did it. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings and preparations. The patent transfer was finalized. James Hartwell's inventions, all of them, officially returned to his estate. Emma became the sole owner of intellectual property worth billions. Vance Tech entered bankruptcy proceedings. The company that had been built on stolen innovations collapsed like a house of cards. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Emma worked with Richard's team to establish transition funds and job placement assistance. She had no desire to hurt innocent people. Victoria Vance was indicted on 17 federal counts: fraud, conspiracy, medical privacy violations, destruction of evidence. Her trial was scheduled for the following year. Legal experts predicted a conviction. Marcus Vance disappeared, somewhere in Ohio, apparently, working at an insurance company. Emma did not track him. She had meant what she said. She was raising her daughter not to think about him at all. Jessica Lane's whereabouts were unknown. She had fled Seattle the day after Emma confronted her and had not been seen since. There was a federal warrant for her arrest, but she had vanished like smoke. Emma focused on what mattered: her health, her baby, her future. And on a quiet Tuesday morning in late August, 6 weeks after the courthouse victory, Emma Hartwell went into labor. The delivery was difficult but successful. 22 hours of labor, a last-minute decision for a cesarean section, moments of fear and pain that Emma weathered with the same stubborn determination she had shown throughout this whole ordeal. And then, finally, a cry. The nurse placed a tiny, squalling bundle in Emma's arms. "Congratulations, Ms. Hartwell. You have a healthy baby girl." Emma looked at her daughter. Dark hair, tiny fists, eyes squeezed shut against the bright lights of the delivery room. "Hi, sweetheart," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, I'm your mom." The door opened. Maggie entered first, followed by Richard. Daniel hung back in the doorway, uncertain of his welcome. "She's beautiful," Maggie said, her own eyes wet. "Absolutely beautiful." Richard moved closer, looking at the tiny face. "What's her name?" Emma had thought about this for months, considered dozens of options, but in the end the choice was obvious. "Grace," she said. "Grace Catherine Hartwell." Catherine had been her mother's name, the woman who died before Emma could form memories of her, the woman whose loss had set so many terrible things in motion. Grace for the future, Catherine for the best. Richard wiped his eyes. "James would be proud," he said, his voice rough. "So proud." Emma looked at Daniel, still hovering in the doorway. "You can come in," she said. He entered slowly, looking at the baby with something like wonder. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he said. 5 years in London. I should have." "You're here now." "Is that enough?" Emma looked at her daughter, at this tiny new person who represented everything she had fought for. Past and future. Loss and hope. "It's a start," she said. 1 year later, Emma stood in the lobby of Hartwell Technologies, watching her employees stream through the doors for another day of work. The building had been Vance Tech's headquarters once. Now it bore a different name, a better name. Grace was strapped to Emma's chest in a carrier, babbling contentedly at the world. The transformation of the past 12 months had been remarkable. Emma had rebuilt her father's company from the ground up, using his patents as the foundation for new innovations. She had hired brilliant people, many of them former Vance Tech employees who had lost their jobs through no fault of their own. The company was thriving. Not just financially, though the finances were certainly healthy, but in purpose, in mission, in the way people talked about their work with genuine pride. "Ms. Hartwell?" Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, approached with a tablet. "The quarterly reports are ready, and there's someone here to see you." Emma frowned. She did not have any meetings scheduled this early. "Who?" Sarah hesitated. "He says his name is Marcus Vance." Emma's heart stuttered, then steadied. "Send him up. To my office, Billionaire." She took the elevator to the top floor, Grace still strapped to her chest. The baby had fallen asleep, lulled by the movement, her tiny fist curled against Emma's collarbone. Marcus was waiting in the reception area. He looked older, worn. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by something off the rack. His hair was longer, touched with gray at the temples. He carried himself like a man who had learned humility the hard way. "Emma," his voice was uncertain. "Thank you for seeing me." "My office." She led him inside, closing the door behind them. Grace stirred but did not wake. Marcus looked around the office. At the modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows. At the photos on the desk. One of Emma's father, young and smiling. One of Emma and Grace, taken the day they came home from the hospital. His eyes lingered on the second photo. "She looks like you," he said quietly. "She looks like my father." Silence stretched between them. "Why are you here, Marcus?" He sat heavily in a chair, uninvited. Emma did not object. "I got a job," he said. "Insurance sales in Ohio. I'm making $42,000 a year. My apartment is 800 square feet." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The Honda Civic broke down last month. I had to take the bus. Is this supposed to make me feel sorry for you?" No, I'm not here for sympathy." He rubbed his face with his hands. I'm here because I needed to see her. Once, I know I signed away my rights. I know I have no claim, but she's still my blood. I just wanted to know she was okay. Emma studied him. The man she had married, the man who had broken her, the man who had been broken in turn. She thought about hatred, about revenge, about the satisfaction of watching someone suffer who had made her suffer. And she realized with something like surprise that she did not feel any of those things anymore. She felt nothing at all. She's healthy, Emma said. She's happy. She's loved. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. That's all I needed to hear. He stood, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. I'm sorry, he said, without turning around. For everything. I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. But I needed to say it. Emma watched his back, the slump of his shoulders, the weight of his regrets. Marcus, he turned. Don't come back. He nodded. Something like acceptance crossed his face. Goodbye, Emma. Goodbye. He left. The door closed behind him. Grace stirred in her carrier, opening her eyes. They were green, Emma's eyes. James Hartwell's eyes. That was nobody, sweetheart, Emma whispered. Just nobody. That evening, Emma sat in her home office, Grace playing on the floor nearby. The room was comfortable but not ostentatious. Warm lighting, family photos on the walls. The desk that had belonged to her father, recovered from storage and lovingly restored. Daniel entered with 2 cups of tea. He had been around more often lately. Not pushing, not demanding, just present. The Zurich deal closed, he said, handing her a cup. You officially own the largest tech patent portfolio on the West Coast. Emma smiled. My father would have laughed. He just wanted to build things. He never cared about owning them. But you care. I care about protecting what's his, what's hers. She looked at Grace. She'll never have to fight for what belongs to her. I made sure of that. Daniel sat beside her. Their shoulders touched. And what about you? What do you want? Emma considered the question. She thought about the past 2 years, the divorce, the discovery, the battle, the victory. Peace, she said finally. I think I finally have it. Grace crawled over, pulling herself up on Emma's leg. Mama, she said clearly. Her first word, learned just last week. Emma picked her up, held her close, breathed in the sweet baby smell of her hair. You know what, sweetheart? Your grandpa used to say that silence isn't weakness. It's patience. It's waiting until you have all the cards. She looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, Mamaskonen, the city where her father had dreamed, where she had fallen, where she had risen. And then you don't have to say anything at all. 3 years later, Emma stood at the window of her office watching the sunset paint Seattle in shades of gold and pink. Behind her, the sounds of a company at work, even at this hour. People building things, creating things, continuing the legacy her father had started. Grace was 3 now, bright and curious and impossibly stubborn, just like her mother, just like her grandfather. She was at home with the nanny, probably refusing to go to bed, negotiating for one more story in that serious little voice of hers. There was a knock at the door. Come in. Daniel entered, looking slightly nervous. They had been together for 2 years now, officially. A slow build, a careful romance. 2 people who had learned the hard way that trust had to be earned, not assumed. The quarterly reports came in, he said. Record profits, again. That's good. Also, the foundation your father's old colleagues set up in his honor just funded its 100th scholarship. Emma smiled. James Hartwell had never wanted fame or fortune, but he had wanted to help people. The scholarship fund was his legacy as much as the patents were. Also, Daniel continued, I have something else. He reached into his pocket. Emma's breath caught. Daniel, I've been carrying this around for 3 months, he said, pulling out a small velvet box, trying to find the right moment, the right words. But I realized there's never going to be a perfect time. There's just this time, right now. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not ostentatious, not trying to impress, just beautiful, simple, perfect. Emma Hartwell, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the trembling of his hands. You are the strongest, smartest, most stubborn woman I have ever known. You fought for your family. You fought for your daughter. You fought for yourself. And you won. Against everything and everyone. He took a breath. I don't want to compete with any of that. I just want to be there, beside you, for whatever comes next. Will you marry me? Emma looked at the ring, at Daniel, at the city beyond the window, glittering in the fading light. She thought about Marcus, about the mistake she had made, marrying someone who saw her as a supporting character in his own story. Daniel was different. Daniel saw her as the protagonist, as the hero. He was not trying to dim her light, he was trying to stand in its warmth. Yes, she said. The word came out quiet, certain, true. Yes? Yes. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He kissed her, gentle, reverent, a promise. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you too. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the sunset streaming through the window. Then Emma's phone buzzed. She checked it, laughing. Grace is refusing to go to bed. She says she needs to tell me something important about dinosaurs. Daniel smiled. Of course she does. Let's go home. Home. The word had meant so many things over Emma's life. The cramped apartment of her childhood, the cold mansion of her marriage, the brownstone where she had rebuilt herself. Now home was simpler. A house in a quiet neighborhood. A daughter who chattered about dinosaurs. A man who loved her without conditions. Yeah, Emma said, taking Daniel's hand. Let's go home. 1 month later, Emma received a letter. It was from Victoria Vance, writing from the federal prison where she was serving an 8-year sentence. Emma almost threw it away unopened, but something made her pause. Some need for closure that she had not realized she still carried. She opened the envelope. Emma, I am writing this knowing you may never read it. Perhaps you will throw this away, as I would in your position. But I need to say these things, even if only to empty space. I am not asking for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. What I did to your father, to you, to your daughter, there is no apology sufficient for those crimes. But I want you to understand something. Not as an excuse, just as the truth. I was 22 when I married Howard. Young, naive, in love. When I discovered what he had done to James Hartwell, I was already pregnant with Marcus. I was trapped, complicit, terrified. I spent 40 years protecting that secret because I did not know how to do anything else. I became the monster I needed to be to survive. And in doing so, I destroyed any chance of being the woman I might have been. I see you in the news sometimes, your company, your daughter, your life. You have built something beautiful from the ashes of what we burned down. Your father would be proud. I never knew him, but I knew Howard's fear of him. James Hartwell must have been remarkable to inspire such fear in a man like my husband. You are his daughter. That is your greatest inheritance. Not the patents, not the money, the courage to fight for what is right, even when the cost is everything. I will die in this prison. The doctors say my heart is failing. Poetic justice, perhaps. But before I go, I wanted you to know. You won. Completely. Absolutely. You won. And you deserve to, Victoria. Emma read the letter twice, then she folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. She did not feel satisfaction, did not feel vindication, did not feel any of the things she had imagined feeling if Victoria ever acknowledged her defeat. She just felt tired and ready to move on. The wedding was held in September on a perfect autumn day. Small, intimate, only the people who mattered. Richard Cole, who had become like a father to Emma. Maggie Porter, who had helped her find herself again. A handful of close friends and family. Grace was the flower girl. She took her duties very seriously, scattering petals with the concentration of a surgeon. Emma walked down the aisle alone. No one to give her away. She was not property to be transferred. She was just Emma, walking toward her future. Eyes clear, heart full. Daniel waited at the altar, looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was brief, traditional, perfect. I do, Emma said when the time came. I do, Daniel echoed. And then they were married. At the reception, Richard pulled Emma aside. Your father would have loved this, he said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I know. I promised him I would watch over you. I think he'd say I finally made good on that promise. Emma hugged him, this man who had carried guilt for 30 years, who had helped her find justice, who had asked for nothing in return. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Thank your father. I just did what he asked. Later, as the party wound down, Emma found herself alone on the terrace, looking at the stars. Grace was asleep on Daniel's shoulder inside. The guests were saying their goodbyes. The night was cool and clear. Emma thought about her journey. The girl who had lost her father at 10, the woman who had lost herself in a bad marriage, the mother who had clawed her way back from nothing. She thought about silence, how she had used it as a weapon, how she had let it speak when words would have been wasted, and she thought about her father's letter, the one Richard had given her on the first day. Whatever the world has told you about failure and success, know that your father was brilliant, and he was stolen from. You are not the daughter of a failed dreamer. You are the heir to an empire. Go take what is yours. She had done it. She had taken what was hers, not just the patents, not just the money, her name, her dignity, her future. A future where her daughter would never know what it felt like to be small. A future built on the bones of the pieces, transformed into something new. Daniel appeared beside her, Grace still sleeping against his chest. Ready to go? He asked softly. Emma looked at her husband, her daughter, her life. Yeah, she said, I'm ready. They walked together into the night, leaving the party behind, leaving the past behind, walking toward whatever came next. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Emma Hartwell was not afraid. Epilogue, 10 years later. Grace Hartwell, 13 years old, stood in her grandfather's old workshop. The space had been preserved exactly as James Hartwell had left it. His tools, his notebooks, his dreams scattered across every surface. Emma had shown it to her daughter on her 13th birthday. A rite of passage, a connection to the past. Grace ran her fingers over an old circuit board, careful not to disturb anything. He built all of this? She asked. He did. Before anyone else understood what was possible. He saw the future. And someone stole it from him. Yes. And you got it back. Emma smiled. Yes. Grace was quiet for a moment, absorbing. She had her grandfather's eyes, her mother's determination, her own fierce intelligence that sometimes scared Emma with its intensity. Will you teach me? Grace asked finally. How to build things like he did? Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. The circle closing, the legacy continuing. Yes, sweetheart, I'll teach you everything. Grace picked up one of her grandfather's old notebooks, handling it like the treasure it was. Mom, yes? Thank you for fighting for him, for us. Emma pulled her daughter close. That's what Hartwells do, she said. We don't stay down. Outside the workshop window, Seattle sparkled in the evening light. The same city where James Hartwell had dreamed, where Emma had fallen and risen, where Grace would build her own future. 3 generations, 1 legacy, and a story of silence and strength passed down through the years, growing stronger with each telling.